We're trying to validate from the outside in, and we never learned how to validate ourselves from the inside out. There's so many layers to recovery. Judgment is a big part of it. I think a lot of us have trouble with dealing with outside judgment. And the way we handle that is to try to not put ourselves in places or situations where we can be judged. And that limits our life in many ways. Having to grow up and live it perfectly so that you felt like you mattered is exhausting in adulthood. You just seem to try to figure out how to be so that you'd be accepted. So many of us, those negative emotions and feelings when we feel judgment from other people just trigger our shame and just take away any bit of confidence we have, and we don't have much to begin with. That's why we try to be perfect for the people around us. But that's an impossibility. We're trying to validate from the outside in, and we never learned how to validate ourselves from the inside out. And most of our lives have been trying to find a way to matter, where we excel, where people can tell us we're good and valued, so that that could fill us up, fill that hole in our soul that desperately needs to be loved and validated. And we have to learn how to do it ourselves. I've tried so many different things to be validated by, and they all left me even more empty in the end. You start off on this path and you think it's the answer. And when you get to your goal, it's going to take away all your self-worthlessness that you feel. There's a little fumble on the words there. Trying to erase that shame inside of you with accomplishments, with money, with power, with status, with sex, with houses and cars and watches, it's never going to do it. There's not an amount of money or a level of status that you will ever get to that will take away what you feel inside. Nothing will do it from the outside. They are like Band-Aids for a bullet wound. It's not going to heal it. It's not going to stop the bleeding. That wound is just going to get bigger and bigger because we're ignoring it. The more we ignore the parts of us that we can't accept, the more power and control they gain over us. We keep them in the darkness. We keep them as far away from our consciousness as possible. And we put our energies outside of ourselves so that we can get a mirroring face from others to kind of patch that hole up. But it never heals it. It's just a facade. We have to stop trying to be validated outside of ourselves and start validating from the inside out. It is so difficult to reverse this process. When you first start stripping away the things that made you feel good, once you realize they were a distraction, what's left? I have peeled away everything I can possibly peel away that gave me joy and pleasure, because it wasn't true joy and pleasure. It was performing. It was an illusion. Look how good I am over here. Look how much fun I am over here. Look at this, look at that. But really what was going on inside was pain and self-hate that I kept so far away from me and so far away from anybody seeing. that if I didn't feel 100% and have energy to perform, I wouldn't leave the house. I couldn't allow you to see that. I couldn't handle the shame of the judgment of not being on and performing, living in that false self just so that you don't abandon me. When I realized that everything that I had been doing was to cover up pain and shame, I stopped doing it. Almost cold turkey. It was a brutal 2 years of almost never getting off the couch. I was a walking zombie. I was feeling the pain that I had been avoiding forever. I didn't realize what it was. I just had no motivation, and I was miserably depressed with major anxiety. Making coffee was an effort. Showering was an effort. I had taken all the energy I had to putting on this false self, this facade for the world to see when I was just suffering inside. When I allowed myself to feel that suffering and I stopped performing, it was one of the worst times I had spent. It was like self-induced pain. And when I would think about trying to get out of it, it would be like, what can I do to get out of this? What can I try now? What's next? There was no next. Everything just felt like I was a fraud because I knew somewhere inside I was just painting over rust. And what I really needed to do was scrape that rust off and get down to that bare metal so I could paint that railing the way I wanted it to be, not the way they wanted it to be. When you start to shift and you stop putting the energy into things that really don't matter, how long can you do it? How long can you keep performing? As you get older, your energy decreases. You have less motivation just as time goes on. Where does that real, simple joy come from? It doesn't come from picking up women. It doesn't come from going to concerts. It doesn't come from going to see shows. It doesn't come from being the funny guy. There's a place of pure joy inside of you that just exists. And it's below the pain. So it's these layers, these levels. So the top level is you pretending that you're okay and performing and putting on this face so people see you the way you need to be seen to feel okay. Below that is the pain. Below that's the abuse and the trauma and the hurt. And below that is just joy. It's sitting there waiting for you to access. The more time you spend trying to get people to see you the way you need to be seen to feel loved and okay, the less time you have to actually access joy. I went out last night and I went and played ping pong. It was the most simple joy that I had in such a long time. I don't even like ping pong. It was probably partly the company, partly I got to feel like a child again, and I just put all of the stuff away. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't trying to be more than I was. It was such a good feeling. I don't know how to access it all the time. But if I'm putting my energy into pretending and putting out an image that is not real, that is time taken away from dealing with the fact that I don't feel good enough just as myself. and is learning to feel good with you as you are, who you are, and not pretending. That is a tough place to be, because you're not getting the applause, you're not getting the validation, you're not getting those mirroring faces. It is a tough, lonely job, and you have to be all the things that you relied on outside of yourself. You have to do it all for yourself now. And most of us don't know how to. It was never modeled. We've never seen it. It wasn't taught to us. So we have to figure it out ourselves. And it's really, truly difficult to do that without a positive mirroring face. But you have to be that for yourself. You have to be forgiving of yourself, compassionate with yourself. Otherwise, what's the point? I'm going to need other people to look at me the way I want to be seen. I need to look at me and see me for who I am. The darkness inside of me and the light. And they can't be so far apart. We have to figure out how to live in that gray area, because sometimes we're going to go dark. Not want to, but it's just going to happen. And other times we're going to be in the light. But you don't want those huge extremes from darkness to light. That gray area is like the sweet spot. From there, you'll have your full range of emotions. You can't cut off sadness. You can't cut off anger. You can't cut off all of those negative, low vibration emotions and expect them to go away. They are hungry and they need to be fed just as much as the happiness in your life and the things you do to feel good. We have to acknowledge that there are parts of us inside that we do not like. That when we feel those emotions, we just shame ourselves into a worse place. We just keep bringing ourselves further and further down the more we reject them. There's an acceptance that needs to be had with the parts of you that you hate. We hate parts of us because those parts of us were hated, and we were abandoned and abused for feeling things that other people couldn't handle. So when we feel them, we take on the role of the person who made us cut those parts off in order to survive. We become that negative voice. We own it, and we beat the shit out of ourselves, forever feeling it. You're allowed to feel sad. You're allowed to feel angry. You're allowed to feel lonely. You're allowed to feel humiliated. It's not going to kill you. It may feel like death to go to those places, and it is ridiculously painful, miserable, lonely, sad, hurtful. But if you keep ignoring it, it's just going to get louder and louder, and then you're going to have to keep mood altering and performing and pouring more poisons in your body to anesthetize your brain so that you don't feel them. You have to learn to love those parts of you, to become whole and complete. We can't just choose the emotions we want. We're humans. We have all types of emotions. And the more you put yourself away from parts of you that do exist, those emotions, that energy emotion is going to get stronger and louder. And as the older we get, that anxiety builds, that fear builds. The less we do, the less we live, and the more we're just fighting to survive. Incorporate those parts, as painful as they are, so that you can feel free from the fear of feeling them. Go into them, experience it.